Welcome back, folks, to episode 77 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills and Self-Improvement Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. And what we're going to be discussing today are a number of things, but more specifically, we're going to be paying attention to the aspect of today's discussion involving attention. Not only what attention is, but what attention does, and the fact that it does take a toll on our energy stores, because any kind of attention, regardless of what it is, whether it's intentional or strictly by observation, something that occurs or arises in our environment as a result of paying attention or observing changes in our environment, we're going to look at how it affects what we do, and also the energy toll that it can take depending on the severity or intensity of a situation and how attention is when it isn't and what we do to try to improve those things. Well, first and foremost to the discussion, what attention is usually described as has to do with how we tend to, in quotes, focus. And focus is kind of a harsh term that we use, especially now in social media and just the modern colloquium where we speak of people having attention deficit disorder as in a neurological difference. And we have these terms along the lines of people being neurotypical, neurodivergent, and people casting these terms around without really understanding what it is that they're speaking regarding that. Now, there are some differences in neurological structure, but to typify them in the sense of category, that's still kind of quicksilver, not something we have a really good handle on, but the terms keep popping up, and they're trying to make sense of what we would call a difference in neurological structures and how it relates to behavior. And what we see is attentional deficit, so to speak, in day-to-day situations. But we're going to just very lightly touch upon that, but we're going to more largely discuss what attention is, how we use it, how it works when we're using it, and what is the toll it takes on us whenever we are attending to things. When my attention is on something, such as a child, we tend to get this sense of absorption. That's all that's there. Some call that a hyperfocus. When it's an adult and to the detriment of everything around, that even verbal commands tend to be not absorbed, and that could also be part and parcel to learning style differences. If one is more auditory versus kinesthetic, visual, or whatever combinations thereof. They used to think there were 11 learning styles. Now we know that there's probably more than 72, probably, and growing since last I'd looked. But learning styles can actually affect how we attend to our immediate environment and those things that we're engaging with. And engagement is probably a better term than just strictly attention used so broadly. And those broad brushstrokes tend to cover some of the nuance that we have in the detail of what we do when we do pay attention to something. And notice I said pay attention. And usually when we have that term thrown out, when someone is being told to pay attention, that means move your attention in the prescribed direction of those things that we want you to be attending to or focusing on in a more scholastic sense. So when we pay attention, let's just take that term for now and run with it a little bit. Essentially, we're using our attention in the direction of something that we are either one, interested in, if we're in school being asked to learn, and therefore we should be attending to the details of the delivery of that. If somebody's lecturing, for instance, or showing you something on a PowerPoint or on a board, a chalkboard or a whiteboard for that matter, for those that are old school scholastics. And also those things that we may be seeing changing the environment, such as if you're out in the woods, someone tells you to pay attention, make sure that you listen. Is there any change in the sounds of nature? Did the birds all of a sudden stop chirping and the insects stop chirping as well? And now we have this silence where we can only hear the wind in the grass, noting differences. So attention can also be used to note differential in what was before and what is occurring immediately, and gives us an idea as to how to predict forward if we're doing bushcraft or out walking around outside or even in the park. You can know when someone is approaching, and that changes the immediate environment. If you've been sitting in the park on the bench, for instance, meditating or just seated listening or watching the birds play, Noting those environmental differences are attentive differential that we can determine things have changed and may arouse us a little bit in the sense our heart rate may go up and we might start to orient and look in the direction or seek or scan our environment to determine where the change or the sound change or the rustling that we may have heard may have occurred. So attention and orientation to what's going on immediately within an environment is really closely tied to that part of us that makes decisions where we, according to what science has said back in the 1950s and 60s, where they came up with this idea of the OODA loop, that is an acronym for observe, orient, decide, and act. And we know that there are other alternative models that may or may not describe the same process, but attention and orientation have to do with the observation and decision making to act or not act or to determine whether or not something is safe or not. And those are cognitive processes at that point once the signal splits off and gets to the higher cortical structures. And they will, in essence, elicit a motor signal if we need to move beyond what our head turning required, this sort of thing. So, very closely tied to this idea of the OODA or the OODA loop. And once again, there are other models, but this is the one that's probably most often used and currently is largely accepted still by law enforcement, this sort of thing. But as far as just generally in our life, what does attention have to do with orientation? Well, it tells you where you are, lets you know what's going on in your environment, where it is, or there is an it out there changing your environment, assuming it's not just a gust of wind. And then after that, your decision making kicks in, where the signal from your perception splits off into your prefrontal cortical areas that determine safe or not safe, this sort of thing. And then after that, you act. Either you just sit back and start doing what you're doing, realize it is safe, or have to change your position, maybe getting up to start walking towards your vehicle, this sort of thing, because maybe it's not so safe. So in this sense, this is where attention and orientation tend to ride hand in hand most of the time. But we did say we're going to focus attention on attention, and yes, I did that on purpose. So whenever we're talking about attention, what is that? Well, that's that requisite cognitive process that we go through that allows us to absorb perceptually through our eyes, through our ears, through our touch, our tactile sensitivity, and our smell, and also our taste, our gustation, to determine what's going on in our environment moment to moment. If you ever had a gustation olfactory event out in the woods, like whenever there's a skunk, that is a pretty serious thing. If something smells so bad that you can taste it, you know they're probably pretty close, or they're at the very least very potent, or maybe need a shower, this sort of thing. And I'm not saying skunks need to shower. There's some beautiful creatures, but I like to appreciate them at a distance personally. But something to think about. So attention, once again, does require some form of energy, as we would like when we think. Like whenever you're thinking really hard on a process, or if you're working really hard on focusing on something, a project, academic, when we do a lot of thinking, higher cognitive process, once again, blood flow carrying blood sugar to the front part of our brain and the rest of our brain as well. Whenever we have activity, there is blood flow, resident blood flow within the brain, moving in those directions, and there's metabolization of said sugar to create what we call that thinking process. Of course, there are electro signals as well, neurotransmitter exchange, and all that good stuff. But generally speaking, the hemodynamics of cognition, the blood flow, and its action during the process of thinking is to be considered. And our brain is a very high octane organ in that it burns hot most of the time. It burns more fuel sometimes than our body does sitting still. So that says something. So a large percentage of oxygenated blood gets used by the process of our thinking and even our autonomic processes in the lower brain stem and in the midbrain areas that we require to keep those areas alive. So attention, once again. So how is it so important in our day-to-day interactions and our social interactions, in our interactions when we make decisions, whenever we're out and about doing work, even when we're exercising or just having fun for that matter? And simple decision making requires a base level of energy. If you do enough of it, you get mentally exhausted, you get tired, you feel like you need to close your eyes and nap, and your body may not be tired, but your body will need to shut down and rest, so it's not in competition with your brain for that blood, or else you'd never have that verve or that jump to need to do things to the degree that you must to be able to do things, because your brain has sapped that energy and you need to restore a little bit. Breathing helps, relaxing helps, sometimes just meditating, not focusing on anything, and just sometimes relaxing your body. That will allow the body to get back into a higher level energetic state where it can become productive. But attention does burn energy. Now, qualities of attention, whenever we are focusing on something that's really fun, like at a birthday party and we have fun, people are paying attention to us, we're paying attention to them, we're singing happy birthday, blowing out candles, things like this. And I am talking about adults in addition to children too, because there's always this plethora of activity where people are putting together the party, getting stuff ready, cooking cakes and God knows what else. And then we have the activity, the party, and the clown and whatnot. Hopefully not the clown, but you understand what I mean. Clowns are creepy, but that is my opinion. But here's the thing with attention, depending on what it is that's there. They're novel events in many cases, often once a year. That makes it novel versus the rest of the year and every day that goes on. That is not a holiday, this sort of thing. And our focus on ourselves, if it's our birthday or someone else's. And those things require attention to detail, mind you, I said attention. And also attentiveness to that detail requires energy and focus and also physical follow through. So there's an emotional load that goes with that, especially when there's a level of importance laid on that. So then that makes the energy of attending to something that's novel and important rather uh, energy hog, if anything. It makes us burn more fuel. We're not being efficient by nature, but rather we're actually testing our levels of self-efficacy in those situations, and that's also burning more fuel because we may be doing things outside of our ordinary because it is a novel event. We may have done birthdays today, rather over the lifetime, but today it's different, and it's always different. You can always say it's like last year. Well, no, it's not. It's a new one that may resemble last year, and these are the things we keep in mind. But attention burns energy. We keep that in mind. That helps us become more efficient. And also, we can keep our emotions in check, not getting overly emotional, overly excited, because then our process of thinking becomes clouded and we start losing blood flow to the front part of our brain. We make marginal decisions and we don't want to muck up what seems to be a really good time anyway. So, whenever we're attending, the less emotional we are, the more clarity we have, the more efficient we become in the process of thinking or doing or making decisions, this sort of thing. But once again, attention burns energy. Now, quality of attention, I did mention earlier, we're talking about novelty, but let's talk about something that's not only novelty, but scary. When you think about things that are horrific, things that are shocking, things that are terrible, now we're walking in the realms of potential trauma, of a potential memory of things that are really negative. Then we start talking about a negative emotional load, yes, but also whenever something that is frightening that's happening, like maybe you're in the bullpen and didn't know you were in the bullpen, thinking that you were where the sheep were, and then there's a bull and it's dark and boom, surprise, what do you do? That kind of scary thing that is an error in judgment because it was dark and I'm unfamiliar, but yet puts me in a situation that now is not only novel but potentially dangerous. Now let's just say I get out of that pen, close the gate, and just by the hair of my chinny chin chin, I am therefore safe. My heart rate is up. I've got adrenaline and I have the after effects. Now I have a memory. But during that time, the amount of energy expended was incredible. It went up, it heightened my senses, and I became acutely aware, and therefore the adrenaline made me stronger, faster, and able to get out quickly. And I became very simply focused on how do I get out of here safely. So these are some important things that whenever we think about attention, there's an expenditure, and it is pretty much going to be relevant to the situation. So we're talking about context. So a context-driven attention is not the same as an attention, let's say, that happened yesterday that was me at the library and I saw a picture of a bull in a pen versus me actually being in the pen. So those are some things that do add to how much fuel we burn. And it's not just exclusive of the brain. It's whenever we have this level of belief and whether or not something is particularly compelling, the picture of the bull versus the actual bull, and then the response in the body that starts to take care of us, our fight flight response. Now, when we discuss attention or lack of attention, often novelty helps. And if we're learning something new and it's uninteresting, we just cannot find ourselves focusing on it. We're probably not going to be very apt to expend attention in that direction. If somebody tells us we have to, it gets really hard. We get really bored and distracted, and it becomes really uncomfortable. And we can't even lay eyes on it comfortably, and we may seem listless and are looking for something else, and we may even exhibit things that look like boredom because we cannot engage with it, whatever that activity or object may be. And that lack of engagement, what we call inattentiveness or a lack of attention, often is what we see as symptomology of behaviors in schools and at work where people struggle with attention deficit disorder in some cases, but not always ADD is implicated, but something to consider. Often it may have to do with other emotional things that get in the way. It may have to do with a measure of what we now call anxiety, state of stress that has been medicalized and now become exacerbated. And we have this plethora of people that have anxiety, in quotes. Not that they don't, and that there aren't people out there suffering it. There are. But now it's been the garden variety excuse for many to get out of doing things, becoming accountable and responsible for their lives, and going out and learning how to overcome what we would call typical obstacles, survival obstacles. And there's much that goes on there that there are malingerers that use that, and there are those that really do truly have a reason to have those anxieties. I work in the field, so I'm certainly not denigrating anyone nor any camp, but just pointing out some differential there because there's a continuum of what we would call anxiety. Now, there was a joke that a biologist taught me, and I still laugh thinking about it. And he asked me, so who are the people that have no anxiety? And I was thinking, I was in anatomy and physiology at the time, and I was like, I don't know. It seems like everyone's stressed was my answer. But then he told me, dead people. And I said, what? Yeah, dead people. And I said, well, do you care to explain? Of course, they don't have anxiety. They're not awake or alive. I was telling him to be able to worry about anything. He said, no, you don't get this. Physiologically, the reflex nerve impulse it fires that draws our diaphragm down. So it'll draw our lungs downward so we can vacuum or suck wind, inhale, is what we call anxiety. That's the root of anxiety. That's not excessive anxiety. That's not clinical level, give somebody Xanax anxiety. He says that is the impulse of life. So only dead people have no anxiety in the truest sense. But all people have anxiety. All do, as long as you're breathing and you're not in an iron lung. This sort of thing. If you're not in the hyperbaric chamber being breathed mechanically, then you have anxiety. Now, excess anxiety and what we call clinical level anxiety disorder, panic disorder, these are related but slightly different things, but more so it's a disorder of being able to environmentally adapt appropriately. And sometimes we get maladaptive behaviors as a result. So, what does that have to do with attention? Well, it has a lot to do with what you're attending to. And also, the stimulus that we have inside are mental imagery that fires motor cortical response, makes our body respond because of its compelling nature, because it believes things are dangerous environmentally, such that heart rate goes up, breathing goes up, but I can't see any evidence to show me that I'm in physical danger, but yet I still have anxiety. That's what becomes embarrassing about anxiety and panic disorder. People get embarrassed and feel like people are looking at them because they cannot see, in most cases, in their environment what might be inducing that anxiety response. And they feel like they're crazy, that they're nuts. It's all in their head. It's really not in their head, but more so in their believing that there is something going on and their body responding in a manner that says, hey, look, we've been in dangers before and it's not dangerous now, but we're going to make sure that you're not because this picture reminds me of when it was at one time, and therefore it's probably better to turn the engines on and get them running to make sure you're safe just in case you got to, because it can't really tell the difference between the real and the not real at that level. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't cognitively determine if something is actually a danger to us in our environment externally versus we're just remembering or even thinking about danger. Can we induce an anxiety or panic level stress response? Yes, we can. Hypnosis is real. Autogenic hypnosis, meaning I'm making this, is a very real thing. And I'm going to finish with this because the next podcast, we're probably going to be talking more about mental imagery visualization and how it's being used for healing in particular. Now, there are some meta-analyses that I've been looking at that said that there are some small effects, but it does not say that there weren't any effects, and that it could probably be used for better performance and sports and this sort of thing for elite athletes. And there's other studies that these people that did this meta-analysis did not look at. And there are many that I've been looking at that actually had seen people that had been in sport with injured, severely twisted ankles, level 2 injury, such that there was edema. That means there was puffiness and swelling. And by using mental imagery, they were able to not only eliminate physical pain, but they were able to speed the healing and reduce the amount of swelling measured. They were actually measuring the edema with a certain little measuring device, some sort of caliper. And they were able to do this with people that were not particularly trained in these areas. So we'll be talking more about this. So what does attention have to do with that? Well, it has a lot to do with it because those things that we attend to, whenever we exaggerate, when we become hyperbolic in what we believe, oh, my leg, oh, my arm, and we start histrionically responding, getting emotional. We, in essence, start a stress response. We can exacerbate the situation and our symptoms, just like the anxiety that is our reflex. Also, what we have to realize is that how we see things can also impact how quickly we heal. And it is a courageous pattern. It's been used with arthritis, people with osteoarthritis, people that are recovering from cancer surgeries, this sort of thing, where there has been pain as a result, or even those that had cancer, inoperable, but minimizing the amount of medication they had to take so they could maintain clarity and be with their families by using this visualization, mental imagery, and even recovery of physical movement, motor, somatic motor imagery, with the idea of recovering motion that they had before, whether it be post-injury, post-surgery, post-neural damage. And these are some important things. So attention is the important part. What is it that we attend to? Does it cost energy? Yes, it does. But there are varying degrees of it, and to paint it with a broad brush and say that there is attention deficit and then we have disorder and that it only falls within the realm of ADD, this sort of thing, is incorrect. There are many nuances to this, even things that I did not touch upon that have to do with how attentive we are. The Zen Buddhist practitioners of meditation for many years that have to understand that it is not a religious thing. It is a breathing and centering thing, that it is a non-religious thing. It doesn't threaten your religion. What it does, though, is provide you an opportunity to silence mind and to be attentive one moment at a time, being what we now hear in the common colloquium about being embodied, being present, also being mindful. Mindful is kind of a cool term. That's a little soft, I think, but also it's pretty accurate in what it is that we get as a result of learning how to be moment to moment by learning how to attend to our breathing and our center, what the Japanese call hara and the Chinese call danshin. And understand the term that I like from a cosmic tradition is called the cosmic fire gourd, which I love that. And that would be the space between your iliac crest and the front of your navel and the back of your lower back and your perineum and just under your solar plexus, the cosmic fire gourd once again, and attending to that space. And whenever we get very basic and breathe, we're no longer worrying about things in the social scheme, but we are attentive to what's going on, not just where I'm putting my mind breathing, but also realizing that I can scan my body by attentiveness, paying attention to my toes, paying attention to, oh, my leg's falling asleep, paying attention to the little pins and needles that are going away because I adjusted my posture while I was sitting, and maybe that little itch behind my ear or on the tip of my nose, or even the one that's on my glabella, that space between your eyebrows. If you have eyebrows, if you have a unibrow, no offense, but you still got one. All joking aside, there are a number of things that we can do with attention. What are you going to pay attention to today? What are you attending to? And realize that you don't have to pay attention. And this is the gold nugget right here. Attention is always on. You don't have to pay attention. You don't have to give attention. It's always on. It never turns off. Even when you sleep, our attention is always on. That being the case, I think that we've covered a good bit on attention in particular, set us up for the next episode of Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project. And for those of you that have emailed and sent some feedback, thank you. I appreciate you. And for this one person from a certain podcast that reached out to me, I want to tell you thank you for listening to my content as well. There is some science backing to this. I try not to get too jargon heavy, but I also like to give good, useful information based in the science and also my practical experience and knowledge. But above and beyond all, I just want to share some things that are useful to open your mind that will never stop serving you. And I hope you have a really good Saturday afternoon. I know I'll be having one. You take care, be safe, and walk well.